Hello, my name is Kevin Oliveira. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Data Security Solutions at Forcepoint. Today, we're going to be talking about Forcepoint 1 DLP. This is an offering from Forcepoint that's cloud native. It's a DLP SaaS solution. We'll be talking more about that. I also have joining me Justin Crowley. He's a Principal Enablement Manager at Forcepoint as well, an expert on Forcepoint 1 as well as Forcepoint 1 DLP. And he'll be giving some very clear demos on what this product is able to do. First, I want to share with you Forcepoint's perspective on data security. What I have here is our data security lifecycle. Often, many people will call it a data security platform. It's a more holistic approach to data security. In the past, we've often been seen as a very strong DLP vendor, and we continue to be recognized as a leader in data loss prevention. And we will be talking about DLP today, but I did want to talk about more broadly just what we're trying to do in terms of data security. We recognize these 4 pillars as being essential to a very strong data security platform or solution for our customers. And we actively look to share different offerings and work with them so that they have all 4 of these present in their environment. The first one is discover, second is classify, third monitor, and fourth, protect. With discover, it's a very important aspect for data security. You need to know what your data is and where it's located. You need that kind of information. Otherwise, it's very difficult to protect it. So discover is essential. It's believed about 80% of most companies have unstructured data, and 90% of that data is not in any regular usage, or it doesn't have any kind of data identification that's been meta tagged to it. And so as a result, this data is considered dark data. It's data that's it's just not seen. And this is a difficult situation for customers, because if you have data, particularly large amounts of data like that, that's unseen, then it's very likely there is personal identifiable information, or PII, or if you're in the health industry, PHI, a lot of sensitive information that needs to be covered and regulated. And so discover is a key method for changing that situation, removing dark data, and being able to see what the data is that you have. Second area, as far as a pillar, is around classify or classification. This has grown in importance over the last few years. It's always been an important part of data loss prevention, but the idea is that we need to not only have some type of classification that talks about confidential or highly confidential or internal, you'll identify that, but also need different types of classification that's often called enhanced classification. Talks about business outcomes or business terms such as HR or marketing or finance. And then under that, you might want to have POs or resumes, any of those kind of classifications, and then also apply those tags to metadata. Another method in terms of classification is fingerprinting. And fingerprinting is an incredibly powerful method for taking a particular file, particularly unstructured files, and then giving it some type of identification that can then be protected. It's important, very critical that data gets classified. Third area is around monitoring, particularly continuous monitoring. Forrester recognizes monitoring as one of the 3 key pillars to a zero trust solution. And we've recognized this as well. And so we want to make sure that we have a continuous monitoring capability within our data security solutions, looking at risky behavior, as well as looking at data, what's happening with the data, where data is going, where it's coming from, and continuously monitoring that for risk and for compliance issues. And then last, the area of protect. Protect is particularly important. It's kind of the meat and the hamburger. You could think of it in that terms, as far as the ability to be able to actually do something in order to protect data from exfiltrating, leaving the environment, protecting against malware, protecting against data breaches and hacking. And so we need some type of protection capability to be able to tie this together. This isn't necessarily linear, doesn't start necessarily with discover for any customer. A customer might want to start with monitor. That might be the most important thing a customer needs to do at the moment. But it is something that works in synergy. And these 4 pillars are ones that we look to for our data security solutions. With Forcepoint One DLP, we've been able to introduce a solution that's a fully SaaS solution that does cover these 4 different pillars in some respects. It's a DLP SaaS solution for all web traffic, for cloud applications, and web-based private applications. It's also a very effective method for covering the broadest range of devices and users. With Forcepoint One DLP, we have reverse and forward proxy capabilities that Justin will be talking about later. That allows us to be able to cover not only BYOD devices like phones and tablets, but also to be able to cover some unusual devices, particularly like an ARM processor-based device or a Chromebook, or maybe IoT devices at the edge. Being able to protect these unusual devices that for traditional DLP, that's been rather difficult, but with Forcepoint One DLP, it's made very easy and it's very effective. We're also able to cover different types of users, such as contractors, effectively this way. The third area, as far as Forcepoint One DLP, is it provides simplified DLP management in the cloud. And so what we have is we provide to our customers over 190 predefined patterns, policies, templates to be able to work with out of the box. And having this many out of the box predefined patterns allows our customers to quickly deploy this DLP, as well as to easily manage. And to have all of this at their just at their fingertips, be able to immediately use, helps for a very efficient deployment of DLP. It also is centralized in the aspect of, if you create a policy, say within the CASB part of your Forcepoint One deployment, you can easily take that policy and then just with a couple of simple clicks, be able to deploy it across the web and across private applications. So it's very effective for that as well. And then last, it really takes advantage of the fully cloud native architecture. And one of the things with companies today and DLP solutions today, they continue to grow. There continue to be more and more vendors in DLP. Gartner recognized about 63 different DLP vendors last year. That was tremendous growth from the year before. And a lot of these new vendors are following where a lot of the customers are going. They're typically very cloud focused. They're focused on the cloud applications into the web applications. And that's where a lot of modern companies that are cloud first are putting their data. And so this is an excellent solution for addressing that, the cloud native, cloud first type of organization. Some of the other advantages with it, it scales very quickly. It's able to do very efficient, very robust scans, particularly for data at rest in the cloud. Scans that would take potentially days in the past, it can be done in hours. It has it's 99.99% uptime with no planned downtime. So it's able to take advantage of that. That comes from our being deployed on AWS. AWS has over 200 points of presence. And so the latency is very low, and you have very high performance. This is very strong in contrast to some of our competitors in the DLP space, particularly those that are in the SSE space, in that it allows many of those competitors have their own data centers, and they're not able to match that huge robustness and that uptime, and then the low latency that we can get with an AWS deployment. And then, sorry, Ben, my last thing I forgot. Hold on. I'll go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I got it. 5, 4, 3, 2. Last with the cloud native architecture is that it is very scalable, and it's very elastic in terms of scalability for demand. So as demand increases or decreases for any individual user or for any organization, Forcepoint One DLP is able to scale with it. And there's no need to have to pay attention to the underlying infrastructure. Looking at the data security lifecycle that we were just talking about, Forcepoint One DLP is excellent, in the area of Discover with rapid scans of data at rest, as I had mentioned before. It's particularly important with respect to Discover. In terms of classify, Forcepoint data classification integration is present. And so you're able to integrate that with Forcepoint One DLP. It also does have, again, I mentioned this out of the box policies. There's classifiers in that as well. And then in terms of monitoring, there is a continuous monitoring capability, particularly monitoring risky behavior, and some policies that are in place that can address that directly. And then last, in terms of protect, you have that centralized management and enforcement that you're able to do across those 190 plus out of the box policies. And now we're going to move ahead to Justin. Justin, do you want to give an overview of what you'll be doing and covering today?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the time here, and you made some great points there. When it comes to data, really looking at that data lifecycle strategy is paramount. Being able to say, we're able to discover where your data is, we're able to classify the data, we're able to monitor and protect. There's a lot that goes into all those different components. And as you mentioned, Forcepoint One can do all of that and then some, right? And so when we talk about an SSE platform, we really, one of the big highlights is how we consider ourselves a multi-mode CASB. So if we look at the CASB component, and what we mean by that is there's different channels for us to protect, right? And as you mentioned, when we have all this data and we're moving to the cloud and customers are moving to the cloud, their data is everywhere. And you mentioned, dark data, we mentioned, ROT data with redundant, obsolete, or trivial data. A lot of the customers have no idea, or, a slim or small idea of where all their data is. Applications like Microsoft 365, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Google, Dropbox, Box. Most organizations may say, hey, you know what? We know what's in Microsoft, but do we really know what's in other applications, right? So how do I get that consistent visibility and control across all of my data channels? There really isn't that great of an option. And that's where SSE comes into play, and mainly Forcepoint One. So when we look at our DLP solution, that's one of the big things that we say is, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, we're able to give you visibility across all those channels, right? And the main one is discover. So if we start, you mentioned it may not be linear, but a lot of the times we want to start, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, let's help you find out where your data is. And the easiest way around that is through APIs. Because when we talk about DLP, as you mentioned, monitor is one great start point, because last thing we want to do is to implement DLP and start blocking things, right? And start decreasing productivity for our users, because we all know if the users don't like a solution and complain about it, it's hard to keep that solution implemented. So the first thing that we do is API. Hey, let's scan all of your cloud environments, Microsoft, Salesforce, ServiceNow, right? The list goes on when it comes to API support. Is let's scan the data that's at rest. Let's find out what data is already there. And you mentioned the scalability running in AWS. Well, the benefit that we have in AWS is historical data. What if me as a customer, I've already been in Microsoft for the last 6 months, let's say, for example, I want to be able to look back and say what data is already there. It's fine that, hey, SASE or SSE vendor X can scan or protect my data moving forward. But what about the data that's already there? Right? How do I now control that data? Right, to find out, do I even have credit card information or credit card files that are publicly shared, externally shared, and so on and so forth. So from an API perspective, that's a great starting point. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, here's the data that's there. Let's find out, should Kevin have access to certain files, right? And that then leads into the classification, right? We have our Forcepoint data classification solution. We also have classification built into Forcepoint One as well, to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, we found 10,000 files. Of those 10,000 files, we can go ahead and use our API to classify, to tag certain content. And based on that tag, we can now protect it based on those certain tags to say, hey, through API, we found a file that contains Forcepoint confidential data. We've tagged this as confidential data. Now we can create policy to say, hey, if we see that tag anywhere in a file moving forward, if it's through, as you mentioned, Kevin, we can create policy for CASB. We can create policy for secure gateway and for ZTNA. So that one single tag that I created, I can now put policy in place to protect and provide visibility regardless of where that file is being uploaded or downloaded to. You could be uploading it into your personal Dropbox from a corporate device, I can now scan that and prevent that from being uploaded, or even through ZTNA if it's an internal application, right? So that's the big thing with DLP is DLP, the way I look at it, DLP is only as good as the data that it can find, right? If your DLP isn't scanning the right areas, it's useless. So if we can say, hey, we can scan all these different channels, regardless of where the user is, what type of device that they're on, to me, that's huge when it comes to DLP. And that leads to our, as I said, our multi-mode solution, API, as well as our inline protection there. So if we look at, or I'll pass it back to you.
Oh, no, I was just saying that's, yeah, particularly when you're talking about the being able to scan the data wherever it is. That's one of the things that we've always worked toward in terms of our DLP solutions is protecting data anywhere it resides and everywhere that people work. And I think particularly with the Forcepoint One DLP solution, it's particularly effective with this SSE capability as well to be able to address that aspect of everywhere that people work. And so this DLP everywhere concept is certainly very relevant for Forcepoint One DLP.
Yeah, exactly. So if we even look into the solution here and jump into, API scanning, so that we'll look at the discovery component. Let's find out what files are actually in my cloud instance, right? You can see on the screen here, we can scan your traditional SaaS applications, right? You can see on the screen here, I have some Outlook, Box, OneDrive, my Google apps. We can even take it a step further and scan your IaaS environments. In this case, I have my Google Cloud Platform. Maybe I have some S3 buckets and there's some files sitting in there, right? I want to be able to scan that and make sure that somebody for some reason hasn't uploaded confidential data into an S3 bucket that is publicly available, right? Huge data exfiltration that can happen in these IaaS environments now. And that always comes down to, misconfiguration, but that's always a different story we have with cloud security posture management. But from a DLP perspective, hey, I can scan the files there as well, right? So you can see here from, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just interrupt, but I seeing the different types of applications that you have there. These are all very popular ones. Many companies have them, but they're not all from a single vendor. You're covering different vendors. How many applications can we cover?
So really, that's a great question, and it comes down to really there's no limit. And the one thing that we have within our solution, when I go to build out a managed app, is you'll notice on the screen any API. Any managed app. And this is huge with some competitors. If I come to you, Kevin, and say, hey, I have this homegrown application, or an application that we call long tail SaaS apps, applications that are maybe unique to a certain industry. Maybe it's a healthcare app, a financial app, but not widely used. Problem is with some vendors, right? They say, hey, great, we can support that, but we have to go back to R&D. We have to actually build out the support for that. Now that could take a while, right? Or if you're the only customer requesting it, chance of them spending the resources to do that is very slim. With our solution, right, we have any managed app. So you can go ahead and build out your own application. So let's say Kevin build out his own website, kevin.com, right? I can go in here and start creating that application, right? I can specify the URLs associated with it. Most times with websites, when you go to download a file or a document, most times there's a string in that URL that is unique, right? And that's how most CASB vendors, secure gateway vendors, DLP vendors know, hey, this could be a download, right? We can add additional domains here. So even if this app was designed in-house by your own team, nobody else in the world has access to the application, you're able to configure that. And therefore, we can now start applying DLP to it. Prime example, I came over from the BitGlass acquisition. We purchased an LMS solution that wasn't a widely known LMS, but we were able to build that out into our solution in minutes. And literally within a couple hours, we had policy built out, DLP implemented across the entire organization for this LMS application, right? And even from an API perspective, I'm not an API expert, but again, if somebody had their own API that they configured, they can go ahead and create customization into that application through an API. Right?
This is great.
Out of the box, even some customers may say, hey, you know what? You talked earlier about the out of box, right? Data patterns. So again, we do have stuff out of the box as well, right? We do have applications here, right, that do have API support right out of the box. There's no extra configuration for you. We have the documentation. It's pretty straightforward, right? So as you said, the well-known applications we cover. But again, if there's anything else, anything custom, we have the ability to do that built into the solution. No need to go to R&D, no need to put in a feature request. It's built into the solution.
That's very powerful. I think particularly being able to source, obviously from a DLP perspective, being able to source the data, and discover data, and then be able to work with the data across all of those locations. It's a complicated task, and it's tremendous how this is taken care of, and that the customers are able to do this themselves. It's not something you have to go to a vendor and have them create.
Well, you mentioned, DLP in a nutshell is a complicated solution, right? Because there's a thin line between, overprotecting, right? That accessibility versus security, right? And that's where, leveraging discover, classify, and monitor to actually find out, the way I see it is define what's normal, right? What does Kevin do on a normal day? What typical files does he have access to? But that's where monitoring is huge. What if Kevin's job changes, right? And that's where API, right? So if we focus in on the API, is being able to monitor 24/7 to say, hey, you know what, this file is, if I look at a file here, this new credit card only file, right? I didn't trigger anything. It's a private file, so it's not publicly shared, right? So from a DLP perspective, we want to monitor. We note that, hey, just an FYI, this file is here. Now, as soon as I change that file, maybe I add additional information into it, it becomes public, it becomes externally shared. My API policy can automatically remediate that. My policy can say, hey, wait a second, any file that triggers, we'll say US PII, or we have here some that contain some terrorism or SSR, social security number keywords. As soon as that becomes public, let's go ahead and remediate that. So we can monitor as we go down the road and make sure certain files don't become sensitive and then become overshared. Right? That's a big thing nowadays, oversharing. So I want to be able to have visibility into that.
Good.
But the cool thing is we also have the ability to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I haven't got to the protect stage yet. I don't have policies set up. You can also manually remediate. So I can go through here and select certain files. And if I wanted to, I can actually encrypt those. I can create copies. I can remove the shares. So even though I don't have policy in place today, even though I'm just in monitoring mode, maybe there's a red flag that comes up. I don't know if I have any public shared files here in my Google Drive. I have some internal shared here. You can see it's shared with my admins, but maybe I want to go ahead and remove those shares. So I can go ahead and click on, new credit card only and say, you know what, I'm going to remove all sharing, right? Maybe I want to remove all public. I want to remove just all sharing in general, right? So I can go and say, hey, here's the 2 files that you have selected. I can notify the user, just say, hey, Kevin, just an FYI, we noticed that you have a file that contains sensitive data, whatever that may be. And you may say, hey, how am I even determining that it's sensitive? That goes back to those out-of-box patterns that Kevin talked about. And the cool thing about that is the ease of deployment. Obviously, when a customer purchases a solution, they want this implemented in no time, right? They wanted this implemented yesterday. So our whole job is, as you said, to make things simple. Hey, here's some out-of-the-box patterns. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, you can expand on that, right? You can create your own till your heart's desire. But hey, here's some patterns that any organization wouldn't want shared, right? Chances are nobody wants a file that contains credit card numbers to be publicly shared. So why don't we just implement policy at the start? Here's some files that contain, credit card numbers, social security, PII, whatever it may be, and let's go ahead and create policy. Or here and remediate, right?
And you may be getting to this now, but I'm really eager to see how it works.
Yeah.
If you can maybe show us as far as how you do the actual taking these out of the box policies and then being able to apply it across channels.
Yep, exactly. So if I go to our Protect tab here and jump into our DLP objects. So again, to make things simple and make it clean, the first thing that we log into is my own library, patterns that I have created myself, or out of the box patterns that I've implemented into my own tenant, right? Because we have over 190 different patterns. Every time I create policy or go through my own library, I don't want to have to scroll through patterns that aren't relevant to me, right? So we have our own little list here. So you can see I have maybe 82 in my own tenant here.
Is this list, and so from this library, this is a mix of custom policies as well as the out of the box? Okay.
Yep. So you can see some, listed as predefined, and then some that I create myself here.
Okay. Now,
if I click on the library button here, this is where it takes me to the larger list, right? Because some of these may not be relevant, right? I may not need to look for Australia PHI. So there's no need to have it in my own list, right? It just
Right.
makes it complicated. So here's all the patterns that we have, right? You may say, hey, how am I supposed to scroll through all that? So we can search, right? We give the ability to filter for different patterns. If I want to look for anything that contains PHI, I can go ahead and scroll through there. So we have all of our different lists here, right? We have anything around GDPR. We specify the regions that it's associated with it. We specify it's global, right? Maybe it's just EMEA. But again, I'm not going to go through all the 192 that we have here. But again, out of the box, there's probably a lot of different use cases that we can cover with a customer. I'm not a regex specialist. So me going in here and trying to figure out how do I create a policy or how do I create a pattern to look for PII for Japan, I have no idea. But I can go in here and I can look at the information about what it looks for. So we have our different classifiers that it can now go up against to verify, and that helps with false positives. So I can have do my due diligence to make sure that, okay, if this triggers, I know that this is PII from Japan. And the cool thing that we have is a test pattern. So before you even implement, and this is a big issue I found in my previous lives with solutions, you want to test something. Okay, well, now I have to create policy, implement it. I got to go to Google and I got to try doing the policy. Right off the start, I can say I can upload a file and test that pattern right out of the box. I don't even have to create rules for it yet. So I now know, great, here's a pattern that I have. I know it's going to capture file X, Y, and Z.
I have a question, just really quick before you go on the last. It was actually in the last screen when you were showing the classifiers. So these ones here, these classifiers, you would have then had to have previously done classification that would have had meta tags on the files, or is it able to look at the files and be able to identify these things?
So what the classifiers is doing is it's going to say, we're going to look for this type of information. So I don't have to create that myself. This is built into the pattern itself. So if I jump into another one, for example, we'll look at, let's find another one that may be global, right? Health data, for example, right? So it's looking for stuff like date of birth and a name, ICD-10 codes, which is the codes to say, instead of me saying you have disease X, Y, and Z, I'm going to give it a certain code, right? So we can look for all those. So these are all the classifiers that are part of this health data. So we're not just looking for date of birth, we're looking for a medical form, we're looking for NDC numbers. So these are all classifiers that brought over once I import. So if I click the import button, I'm now able to bring this over and implement it into my policy. Oh, I already have it in my policy here. So let's find one that I don't already have. I don't think I have Greece PII. Yeah. So let's go ahead and import, and I can now import that into my own policy. So now if I go back to my own library, let's do a refresh, right? I should then see my Greece PII, which I have down here. Right now I have all my classifiers that are brought in. And then I can now go ahead and say to my policy, right? Let's go ahead and say, great, I'm now looking for, maybe I'm based in Athens and I want to look for PII. So as you mentioned earlier, the ease of use when it comes to implementing across Secure Gateway, CASB, and ZTNA, all components of our SSE platform, I'm now going to go down to, say, my web content, right? And say, you know what, we're going to go to, we'll say sales enablement, marketing, finance, and sales. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and say, if you're trying to upload, so let's go ahead and click on a new line here. And notice that my list is pretty small. These are just the apps or the patterns, sorry, that I've implemented my own tenant, right? I have that list of that 192 out of the box. Can you imagine if I had to scroll through 190 every time I wanted to create policy? But there's my Greece PII. So now
this is your library. This is your library.
Yeah, this is my own built-in library in my policy. So it's only the ones that are relevant to me, that I'm interested in, that I've added to my library, and now I can create policy for it. Okay. So when I'm under Secure Gateway, I have my Greece PII, and then I can specify, do I want to allow it or do I want to just deny it, right? Do I want to notify the user? So there's going to be a pop-up, hey, Justin, you were blocked for reason X, Y, and Z. We can send the user an email as well. I like using the user email because that, again, may give the user a bit more information, right? The pop-up is just a quick, hey, you were blocked, please don't do it again. The email could just be, more detailed to say, hey, Kevin, we noticed that you triggered this policy. If this was something that you need to do for your job, right, reach out to us and maybe we can create some policy or figure out why you're trying to accomplish that.
So that
You-
email could be for both allow and for deny.
Correct. Yep. As
Okay.
long as the notify is set. And again, that's actually a great point there. If we went to monitoring, right?
Mhm.
So we may say, hey, you know what? I don't feel comfortable denying everything yet. I'm just going to allow this.
Right.
Maybe I'm not going to message Kevin every single time, but maybe I'm going to message, maybe I have an email box designed around monitoring for DLP, right? To say, hey, you know what? I'm going to send an email every time one of these is triggered to say, hey, just an FYI, we are noticing that a lot of PII is being uploaded. So maybe we have to put some policy in place to start restricting that.
That's great. I just think when we do deployments early on, with customers that don't have DLP, they often need some sort of training
Yeah.
apparatus, something that's going to allow customers use the training moments, when it happens, and then they can learn, and then you can eventually then move to blocking.
Correct.
And so it's very difficult to start off blocking, but if you can do that training
Yeah.
across the organization, it's tremendous.
Well, and same when you jump down to so that's our secure gateway. So if I jump down to our CASB apps, right, my managed SaaS apps. So again, I'm in Google Workspace. Same thing. I can go to upload or download. So let's say, we'll do a download this time. So I can go to download and I can search for that same pattern here. Right, you'll notice that in here I have my file in action, and I have a bit more actions available when I'm going through a CASB solution. This time I can encrypt it. So again, I don't want to block it. Maybe I'm still in that monitoring mode, but maybe there are certain patterns that are a little bit more sensitive than others. I may not want to block them, but I can encrypt them. So they're now password protected. So even if Kevin loses his laptop, puts it on a USB stick, whatever it may be, I now know that file is encrypted. And the cool thing, once we do the encryption, we can actually do callbacks. So every time that file's been opened, it basically phones home and says, hey, I've been opened. Here's my location. So I now have visibility of where that file goes.
Great. Who has the encryption for the encryption keys for it? Then how does that? Who owns that? Is that with the admin?
That's all set up with the user themselves. So the user themselves, when you're logging in through Forcepoint One, even if you're an Okta, right, or Ping Duo, because we integrate with different IDPs, you still have an account that is associated within Forcepoint One. And so what happens is they log into Forcepoint One. In the top right-hand corner, for example, right, they can actually edit their profile. And within their profile, you'll notice, it's going to ask me to log back in. So if I actually edit my profile here, you're going to see that I have a file encryption password. Okay. Right? So I set that password myself. So that's managed by me, right? So I can have full control over that file. And then one action we also have is the DRM read-only. So again, I may have a certain file, and I always like the DRM is if you're dealing with financial, right? Last thing you want is somebody to add an extra zero, to a number or alter somebody's health records.
And DRM again is digital rights management, right?
Yeah. So we're able to, you can see I have some files here where I make it read only. So when they download that file, basically what happens is it downloads as like an HTML file. And what happens when they open it, it opens up in the browser, and then it phones home, and they have to authenticate in order to get access to that file.
That's right? Great.
And they're not able to make any changes to that file.
Both these, I think the DRM and the encryption capabilities within Forcepoint DLP, the thing that's really exciting about it, and more I hear of as far as an interest, definitely with the analysts, is some way of protecting the data beyond the perimeter and continuing to be able to protect. And so then it's neat how you have both of those as far as encryption and this DRM read only to continue to protect that data directly from the DLP program solution.
Yeah. And as you can see, that I always like to go back to the simplicity, right? We have that pattern, and now on a single page, I'm now able to add it to my secure gateway. I'm now able to add it to my CASB. I could even go down to my ZTNA apps, right? I have, Splunk. I don't know why some grease PII would be in Splunk, for example, but again, if I wanted to, I can go in here and specify any one of my patterns, right? Maybe somebody is a sneaky user and they're trying to get something through Splunk, or even a use case around Splunk. I don't want certain users downloading reports, right? So I can go ahead and create rules to say, look for a PDF, look for certain titles, right, in a file name or whatever the case may be. And I can now apply that to my ZTNA. But as you can see, every single pattern that I have, even the rule creation, right? It's not like with ZTNA with Secure Gateway and CASB, The rule creation or structure is different. As you can see, it's the exact same. I specify a pattern, I specify the action, I specify, do I want to notify? And then you can see I have all my different notifications here. Now,
And one other thing I noticed is that you have here, if you can maybe talk to, is I think it's pretty unique. It's this aspect of download DLP versus upload DLP.
Mhm.
And typically, I think of DLP, it's always data exfiltration. So it's always it's kind of like download, I would think, but it's usually it leaving the environment. How does upload work as far as from a DLP perspective?
Yeah, so upload is great, especially when, prime example is, Forcepoint. We deal with partners. We deal with external vendors ourselves. So I may have a certain folder where I have content that I share with partners. I deal with other vendors that I'm dealing with. So I may not want sensitive data sitting in that folder. And we all know data exfiltration, it's not always malicious. It could be accidental. People didn't realize they shouldn't put that file in there. So from an upload standpoint, one thing you can see for malware scanning, right? We didn't even, that's a different topic in itself, but still malware, we're looking at the data. So from an upload perspective, I don't want Kevin uploading malicious content into OneDrive. So I can scan that data in motion. Also, I may not want certain files being uploaded into to certain locations. So again, hey, if you're uploading a file that contains Forcepoint confidential, and you're uploading that into, let's say if we cancel it at RZ18, and you're uploading that into Salesforce, well, there should be no reason that file should be uploaded into there, right? And even from a, Microsoft, that type of file, maybe it's source code. That source code should not be uploaded into, or CAD drawing, whatever it may be. Say you work for Apple and you have the latest CAD drawing for the new iPhone, probably shouldn't be uploading that into your personal OneDrive, right? So we can go ahead and scan that as well. And the big thing around the upload is secure gateway, right? Because again, we see that, hey, somebody's getting access to their own file share. And this is where it gets cool, because a lot of the times, and again, in my previous life as well, web traffic is a blessing and a curse, right? Web is great because I can go to the internet, I can search whatever I want. Customers go to the cloud because they want to increase productivity for their workforce.
Right.
Well, again, that's great. I can go search the internet to my heart desires, but we don't trust the web, right? So how do it's really that gray area, right? Without over blocking. That's the biggest thing with secure gateway and DLP is over blocking, right? So what we can do from an upload standpoint, hey, allow your users to go to Facebook, allow your users to go to LinkedIn, their own file share. Because, hey, if Kevin wants to go to his own personal Dropbox and download, his kids selling, chocolate bars for their soccer team, and he wants to download a sign-up sheet, hey, to each their own, he can download that. But as soon as he starts uploading maybe sensitive data, and this is one big thing I just mentioned earlier, right? Data exfiltration isn't always malicious. We see this a lot in healthcare where, hey, there's not enough hours in the day. A doctor wants to take some patient information home because he wants to do some research. Again, not malicious. He's just trying to do his job or her job. So they want to upload. Same with enterprise DLP, right? Copying to a USB stick. That's always huge. So same thing when it comes to cloud, right? I want my users to be able to access their file shares, their own personal, but I don't want them uploading sensitive data. So if we went back to that classification and all that, we can now put in policy to say if somebody's uploading sensitive data or confidential data that's been tagged through Forcepoint classification, I don't want them uploading that into their personal Dropbox, right? Or I don't want them uploading that into, I can see I have a rule down here, personal webmail, right? So maybe you're emailing it to yourself. You're opening up Yahoo Mail and you're emailing it to your personal email, right? Okay, well, we can go ahead and prevent that from being uploaded.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think, again, earlier on talking about this growth in terms of cloud first organizations, a lot of people working with cloud apps, working with the web, this aspect of upload, download in terms of data exfiltration is really important. Sounds like it's very unique in with respect to those channels, but it's great that, Forcepoint has this capability built into the Forcepoint One DLP.
Yeah, and even from a reporting standpoint, so we integrate with the leading SIMs, right? If you want to send your data to Splunk, QRadar, and so on and so forth. But every time you create a rule, I don't know if you noticed, we have this generate an alert, right? Or send to a group email. So if something gets triggered where, we don't want to, disturb the IT team or security team every time a DLP event gets triggered. But maybe, hey, if somebody's uploading malware, or maybe there's a certain pattern that, hey, if this gets triggered, this is our worst case scenario, and I want to be alerted. I want to be notified. So that's where we can send an email to a group email. Maybe it's a security team. And from a monitoring standpoint, the nice thing is this little alert section, right? So I can still have these alerts, right? So if I jump into my alerts tab here, right? So earlier when I was doing some testing, I can see all my different policy here, right? So I have my summary.
This is all your incidents then. This is where you view all the incidents?
Correct. So this is from my secure gateway one, where you can see I was trying to upload some social security numbers, right? So I can see all those details on all of these events here. And same thing with the CASB as well. So this is my secure gateway. I was doing some testing there. I don't know if I have any CASB data in this one for my testing, just to show you. There we go. So there's my Google Apps, right? So there's me testing yesterday. Hey, I tried to upload some text files that contain PII and social security number, and I blocked it. Well, I can easily jump into the event details of that. And again, this is huge. I was on a personal device. I was not on a corporate device. So we can do, as you mentioned, all this without agents, right? And the big use case around that is BYOD, contractors, right? Especially now we're noticing with the remote workforce, contractors becoming more popular. Well, if you're a contractor, Kevin, you're not going to install a VPN or agents on your personal computer. You're only going to be with me for 6 months. I can't justify shipping you a brand new computer for 6 months. So how do I increase productivity, reduce risk, right? Reduce costs and streamline compliance for contractors? And this is huge for us to say, hey, it doesn't matter. Justin's trying to access Google Apps. He logs in through single sign-on, right? That's a whole different story of how we do all that. But now I can see Justin's transaction, right? I can see where he's been, located. What machine was he coming through? What app was he accessing? What actions did I apply, right? Information on the file. I can even track the history to see if we've seen this file before, right? We even have a hash. If this was a malicious file, you can jump to VirusTotal or Google to search for that information, right? The URL, the path. So we give all these details on this transaction. So again, if we went back to the monitoring stage, I may not want to block this traffic. This may just be set to alert, right? So you can see alert. I may have triggered DLP because I know it triggers a pattern, but maybe I don't want to deny it, right? So I can go ahead and just have that list of alerts or list of policies or actions where I didn't want to really deny anything, but I just want to be notified and figure out, okay, what are my users typically doing? Are they using, a certain folder within Google Drive for source code? Should I allow it? Because last thing I want to do is start blocking it. And well, hey, that's how they do their job. But then that leads you to the next question. Okay, maybe they should be doing that. Maybe they should be going a different route. They shouldn't be uploading source code into OneDrive. Maybe they didn't know that wasn't the approach to take. But again, all those details that we can give you without anything being on the endpoint. I could have walked out of Apple 5 minutes ago with a laptop, connected into my Google instance, and we're now able to implement that policy, right? And that's a huge thing that we can do here with BYOD. That's a huge use case that a lot of our customers are looking for, and a lot of our competition has issues when it comes to we call it the agentless technology.
What specifically is it that makes it that we are kind of a leader in that? What is it in terms of our technology, would you say?
Yeah, and so without getting into the weeds too much, we call it our Ajax VM. And it's the way that we intercept the browser system calls. So when the browser is trying to figure out, hey, you want to connect to gmail.com. Well, the browser has to know what URLs do I get access to, right? Because we all know just because you went to gmail.com or cnn.com, there's a whole list of different URLs that are being requested in the back end. Well, the browser has to know how to get access to those. So what happens is some reverse proxies, right? When you do the agentless technology, they just look at the URL, right? So what are the URLs being requested? And then they rewrite the URLs. But what the problem is typically those reverse proxies, or even, if anybody's familiar with web application firewalls, right, your WAFs, is a lot of those are hard coded. So what happens, they say, great, Microsoft 365, here are all the domains associated with that application. So anytime we see that domain, we rewrite the URL to what we call a proxy URL. That means that's how we redirect the traffic to a proxy, a CASB solution. We rewrite it to Microsoft dot, vendor.com. So it redirects to that proxy, and then the proxy is able to intercept it, find out what the initial URL was, and then send the user to that URL. But problem is, say Microsoft, Facebook, Google, whoever it may be, they come out with a new URL, right? They now have Microsoft 365 dot, and there's a different domain, or there's a different format. The URL string is different. So now those traditional web application firewalls or reverse proxies are going to miss that, because they are looking for these domains, but now Google's added a couple more. So what they have to do is they have to go back, add those additional domains. So there may be a short period of time where the reverse proxy is broken. To the end user, it may not look like it's broken. They may still get access to the page, but their DLP or their uploads or downloads may not be going through the proxy because it's going to a different domain. The way that we do it is, as soon as that browser, you type in gmail.com or you try to go to a certain URL, we look at the actual browser system calls. So we look at, we call it our Ajax code and, all of that good stuff. But what we do is we say, okay, what URLs is the browser actually trying to get to before they even get there? And so what we do is we rewrite them, basically earlier on in the session, I would say. So we're not missing anything. We look and say, great, we don't care what if anything's been hard coded, we just say, hey, here's the list of URLs the browser's trying to get to, just rewrite them, right? And we now know that these URLs are part of Google. These URLs are part of such and such. And so that's the way that we're able to do it without getting too technical. Again, we call it our Ajax VM, but it allows us to have this reverse proxy, right? Through single sign-on, right? We do it through single sign-on. Most managed SaaS applications nowadays support single sign-on. So as simple as going in there, we can even get into, we do SAML proxy, we do ACS proxy. That's, again, a whole different conversation. But again, that's how we're now able to get in line between the users. And now we can easily apply that DLP. And because we do it with that approach, that's how we can now easily add any application, right? Leveraging that approach, it doesn't matter if this application was, born yesterday, or it's a well-established application like Salesforce. The DLP policy can be the same regardless. So if I was to add a custom application right now, you would look at that and say, the way that we create policy, the structure of it is the exact same. So we're not, saying, hey, with Google, you get to do X, with Microsoft, you can do this. That custom application, the way we create DLP, that upload and download, notify, encrypt the file, make it read-only, we can do the exact same thing for those custom applications. And it's all because of the way that we do our agentless technology or our reverse proxy through our Ajax VM.
That all applies clearly to the cloud applications. Does it work with respect to the web traffic or the private applications?
Yeah, so with the web traffic, and this is where there's different approaches that we take. So with the web traffic, there's two ways that we could look at that. Is so from a corporate device, if I'm on a corporate device, we can install our Smart Edge secure gateway agent. And what that does is there's no need for a reverse proxy because it's able to intercept the traffic at the agent and forward that traffic out to our cloud, and then we can apply the DLP. There's also the Cloud SWG, Cloud SWG solution that we have here, where you can sit behind our firewall and you behind an IPsec tunnel or GRE tunnel, no agents needed, and you can redirect all that traffic out to our service there as well. So the DLP can be applied in the cloud, no agents necessary from a secured gateway. That's great if you have maybe, a hospital, you have guest Wi-Fi, you have a large organization where I have people coming and going, I can't install agents on all those devices, or as you mentioned, Chromebooks, or we mentioned Linux devices where it's really not a device where you install an agent. So how do I do secure gateway? How do I do DLP? That's through our cloud SWG. And then from a CASB standpoint on Chromebooks, that whole single sign-on, not needing an agent, it doesn't matter the type of device, right? Because the web traffic, the way that you interact with those websites, it doesn't matter if you're on a Chromebook, Linux, or anything like that. The way that you interact with those websites is still the same, right? You still are accessing it over a certain protocol, and we're now able to control that traffic. And then same thing for ZTNA. You have these internal apps, these on-premise applications. Through our ZTNA connector, right, we're now able to apply that DLP policy and that's why with Forcepoint being, a data-first SASE, a lot of SASE and SSE vendors are really focused on just the access control to say, hey, I'm going to allow this user access to my internal app, or I'm going to allow this user access to Google Drive, Microsoft, whatever it may be. The access control is great, But again, from a monitoring standpoint or from a data exfiltration, what if Kevin goes rogue, right? Kevin's leaving the organization. He starts taking data with him. A lot of these tools out there that just do access control, well, they've lost visibility. And that's where a SSE solution, being able to do DLP, and that's the thing is, not all SSE solutions are created equally. We always tell customers, what about your data that's at rest, right? And even if we took it even a step further with the data at rest, leveraging AWS, hey, we can scale much quicker.
Well, thanks, Justin. This is really very interesting, very informative. I just want to leave you all with the fact of, or just what Justin was just describing around our data first SASE. We call it data first because of us being Forcepoint. We have this huge heritage of DLP and data protection, and so we do bring that capability, as Justin has just been showing with Forcepoint One DLP. And we have very strong DLP. We look at the data, we focus on the data, we recognize the data is what customers want to protect. And so we have that as first in terms of our SASE solution. And we're a single vendor SASE provider, able to provide the SD-WAN as well as the SSE solution. For more information, please go to forcepoint.com/one, O-N-E, and you'll be able to find out more about Forcepoint One, the platform, as well as our SSE solution, and also about Forcepoint One DLP. Thanks.